today's video, we're going to take a look at how to set up document sets, and we're specifically going to use the use case of records management. So in cases right here, we've got financial records and we've got employee records. And in this case, we're kind of demoing what the federal government goes through with GRS and an example of that. Now, these aren't precisely what these things are, but GRS 1.1 item 10 and then GRS 2.2 item 10, and then the information that you would get from a record schedule for this type of information. Now, these are the document sets, and when we click onto here, we can see the actual documents in here. And in this case, we can see that the columns all change to match the type of document that we're adding in here. And you could add Excel or whatever types of documents that you have in here, and it'll give you a visual indicator when something is due. Now, in this specific example, it is the individual documents themselves that have the disposition dates and triggers. If we go back to our document set library, we'll see that in this case, the actual entire document set, in this case, employee records for Travis, will go for a disposition date of 2032. And then this is very easy to adjust by just changing your trigger date. And the trigger date could be anything that you decide matters. Maybe it's a project, or maybe it was the date that you completed some review on some SOP or policy document inside your organization. But if we click on this one, we'll see that what's inside of here is different because we no longer care about the disposition date for individual files that are in here. The entire document set will be disposed of at the same time. Now, don't forget, if you like this kind of content, hit that subscribe and like. It does help the channel grow. All right, let's go ahead and jump right in. Now, here is the document library that we're going to be using for this demonstration. And one of the key things I want to point out is I'm using Microsoft Teams. I usually recommend that you use Microsoft Teams for your record retention requirements. It's better for employees to work with the files where they normally work. And in most cases, you're using Microsoft Teams to store all of your files. And that's usually how I recommend configuring things, is that you've got a team that all the members of that team can then access their files and work out of the team. This makes it a little bit easier for ensuring that all your employees are actually putting the records into the correct folders. Essentially, you build the records management process around their existing work habits. If you require them to move files into other folders as part of their work habit, you're more likely to lose records that you want to retain. It's always best in a digital age to work with the files where they're at and then set up file retention at that location. Now, think back to the old days when we did everything with actual files. It used to be that we had filing cabinets for years in many cases. So each year would have its files. Maybe it was a drawer for 1 year, then the year before that was a different file drawer or entire cabinet. Everybody set it up a little bit different, but generally all you had to do is put it into a year grouping, or by months in some cases, depending on the retention cycle. And then when you hit the next year or the third year or the fourth year, you knew that the year that had happened 3 or 4 years before was no longer relevant and was ready for disposition instructions, whether they were permanent records and they get transferred to wherever they need to go, or they're just disposed of and deleted or destroyed. So that used to be how things were done in the old days. It was very easy to keep track of as long as you were organized. Now, in the digital age, we have files everywhere. They're on SharePoint portals, they're on OneDrive portals, they're in Teams. They are literally everywhere. And many of those files are records, depending on how you want to look at it and how you define it for your use case. Most companies or organizations, in my experience, set up for record storage, not for record disposition. It makes it incredibly hard to find the files that need to be disposed of per the disposition requirements. If you set up for disposition from the onset, it makes it much easier to manage your program. Now, I'll also point out that this is not the preferred method for how to do this using document sets and content types. The preferred method is to use Microsoft Purview. Now, if you've never heard of Microsoft Purview, it's one of the programs that Microsoft provides. Usually it's part of your E3 or E5 or your G3, G5 licensing scheme, or your enterprise level, essentially, licenses. It includes Purview as part of that process. And as we can see here, we have one for records management. This is the gold standard, if you will, for how you do records management inside of an organization. This is always where I would recommend you start, is doing this. But in my experience, a lot of your ITs are hesitant, resistant, unwilling to turn on records management for some reason. Part of it is, I think, because of how Microsoft has built this, because there's a lot of things that you can do inside the Purview area, whether it's your compliance or your catalog or your lifecycle management. There are a lot of functions built into Purview these days, and a lot of your ITs are resistant to give access to people that are outside of IT. And typically records management is seen as more of a admin or HR related function, not necessarily an IT one. Again, regardless what the reason is, this video assumes that your organization is resistant to using Microsoft Purview, but this is the preferred and best approach for doing this because it pretty much automates everything. There is a high setup time to get everything up and running, and then there is a learning curve for how to actually implement it, especially since you probably got tens of thousands, if not millions of records already at this point. The easiest time to do this is when you are creating a business for the first time and it's getting everything set up. That would be the ideal time to do this, not after the fact, where you've got potentially millions or tens of millions of records. Now, the first thing we need to do is turn on the function that we're going to use. So to do that, we just go up to our little gear icon here, and then we're going to go to our site information, and then we're going to go to our site settings. And then in our site settings, we're going to go to our site collection features here. Now, you will notice that this is part of the site collection administration, so you are going to need a site collection administrator in order to make this change. Again, probably not the right level to put this particular setting. If your portal is brand new, more than likely you'll know who the site collection administrator is. If it isn't new and it's an older existing site, this could be a little bit more challenging to figure out. It's usually one of the site owners, so if you reach out to some of the site owners, you can find the site collection administrator to make sure this is turned on. But we're going to go to our site collection of features here, and then we're going to look for document sets. And we're going to see document sets right here. We want to make sure this is turned on. And now that we've got that turned on, we're actually ready to begin doing this process. Next, let's just go back to our site settings here. Now that we're back in our site settings, the first thing we're going to do is take a look at our site columns. We're going to have some shared columns between our different document sets. Now keep in mind, SharePoint libraries have one column schema, so you can't have the same column mean different things in different document sets. This is one of those limitations that you're going to run into with SharePoint versus using Microsoft Purview, is you are a little bit more limited on how you could set this up. Ideally, you'd be able to set up a document set for each type, and it would have different columns displayed between the documents that are displayed inside the document sets. But the document set itself is going to have a lot of the same core columns shared between each, and you can't really have other columns that are specific to that document set. They are going to display for both document sets if you add columns. So for us, most of our columns are going to be shared columns for that reason. Let's go ahead and create a column. And this first column, we're going to go ahead and call it disposition control type. And it's just going to be a choice column. And we're going to go ahead and put it in a new group. So we're going to create a new group, and we're going to call this records management column. We want to say that it's required. And then for our choices, what we're going to say is container controlled and item controlled. Now, what are we trying to do with this? Now, you might have a situation where a document set is a group, and that entire group gets disposed of at the same time, or whatever the disposition instructions happen to be for that set of files. It's going to happen at the same time. Think of personnel files. A lot of times you wait a certain number of years after an employee leaves and then you dispose of the records. This is where that would be the case, is you have all of these personnel related files in this folder and you want to get rid of them or transfer them or whatever you're going to do with it at the end of the disposition date at one time for every record that's inside of that document set. The other option is each document inside of a document set has its own individual disposition date. It might be based off of when it was created, it might be based off when it was modified, or you could put a date in there and calculate it that way. So you're going to have two different kinds of scenarios. In this case, it could be a specific type of financial report. Maybe you want to keep a financial report for a certain period of time. Well, you're going to have multiple financial reports over the given year period. The first one might be 3 years from now. The very last one might be from today, and it'll be disposed of 3 years from now. So you don't want to dispose of all of them because you need to retain a certain number of those financial reports. So that's just an example of how you might set this up. Again, your use case might be completely different, but that is the options that we're going to put in here, is the ability to remove an entire document set based off a disposition date, or the ability to individually for each document set disposition. Another example of a group one might be your notices or your directives or your policy SOP type guidance. Whenever you update all that, you might want to keep a record of comments or reviewers' information, things that they didn't agree with, things that they didn't like. You might want to have a record of that for that review process. So you'd want to keep that entire document set and then remove it perhaps when you do the next update or the next 3 or 4, or maybe over a certain number of years, you retain those. Now let's go ahead and we're going to go ahead and remove this. We don't want to have a default choice populate in here. That way the user has to make a choice based off of this. And let's go ahead and hit the OK button for this. Now, if we scroll all the way to the bottom, we're going to see that first column has been added to the records management column. We're going to add several others in here as well. Let's go back up to the top and create another column. Now for this column, we're going to go ahead and put in there our retention period. And we want this in years. Now for this one, we're going to make it a number option here. And we're going to go ahead and add it to our records management group that we created. And again, we're going to require that this column retains information. And we're going to say that it has to be positive, but we're not going to put a max. I guess we could put it in there as maybe 1,000, just to give it 1,000 years. It's essentially a permanent option. And then we've got the number of decimal places. Now you could set it as 0 and essentially have whole numbers. We're going to go ahead and put this to 4. And the reason why we're doing that is, what about if you've got kind of a strange retention period? Maybe it's a certain number of years, months, and days that you have to retain something, or maybe it's just a certain number of days. Well, we can put in a decimal. So for example, maybe it's a 6-month requirement. Well, 6 months is half a year. So you'd put in 0.5, and then all of our formulas are going to work off of that. You could also create a column for years, months, days. If you wanted to do something like that, that's a lot more work than just figuring out what the decimal equivalent of the year is for your retention period. Now, oftentimes, if you want to keep it as a whole number, the other thing you could do is just make it a longer disposition period. So for example, maybe the requirement is 6 months. You just set it to a year. You're guaranteed to keep it for the 6-month requirement. You're just going to keep it a little bit longer by default as part of your process. Either approach does work. All right, let's go ahead and scroll down here and hit the OK button. And let's go ahead and create another column. And this is going to be our disposition trigger date. And this will be a date time. And again, it'll be part of our records management column here. And then we're going to go ahead and use our date only. We don't need time. Most record retentions don't care about time, so we'll keep that out of there. And we'll keep it as a friendly date, just to make it a little bit easier to work with. And let's go ahead and hit OK. Now you might be wondering, before I hit the OK button, what do we need this for? Couldn't we just use the created by date or the modified by date? And you absolutely could. Here's one thing to consider. When you hit that disposition date, whatever that happens to be, sometimes when you open up files in SharePoint, OneDrive, and some of these things, it records that as a modified, even though you haven't changed anything. Now this is kind of the problem, again, not using Purview. Purview would actually lock the record for editing once you've affixed a retention label to it. That isn't how SharePoint works. So if you use a modified by, you're going to run into that problem. And a lot of times if you're creating the file, you're making changes to it, you're doing updates, you're getting an approval for it. So it's not necessarily based on the created by date anymore. This is where a disposition trigger date is helpful. Plus, let's say there's a legal requirement, you're getting sued and you have to keep all these records and they're coming up for disposition. You can now change that disposition trigger date to be closer to when the expected outcome of legal action is done. You could also add a checkbox for pending legal action. Either approach will work. It's a little bit easier just to change the disposition trigger date, in my opinion, because you do have to adjust the formulas to incorporate the legal hold option or whatever you want to call it. Basically, you're not going to destroy that record for whatever reason. Legal is a common one, so that's an easy one to kind of come up with. But essentially, you can just also change your disposition trigger date as part of the process. Now, let's go ahead and go back down and hit the OK button here. All right, let's go ahead and create another column. Now for this one, we're going to go ahead and call it the GRS authority. And let me explain where I'm getting this from. And this is going to apply to the next couple columns. So let's go ahead and take a look at our GRS document for a second. Now on the GRS portal, and I'll put the link for this in the description if we want to check this out, you can take a look at it and actually follow along with the video. We've got the option for looking at the general record schedule right here. In this case, we're just taking a look at the 1.1. We're going to actually recreate this one and then also 2.2 down here. So these are the two that I'm going to demonstrate as part of this video. But let's go ahead and take a look at this one here. So we're going to use this as the authority. Now we actually have disposition authority over here. We could also use this. I'm just going to use the GRS authority, and we're going to reference it as 1.1 financial management and reporting records, or something abbreviated that means that. And then we're going to recreate 010, or item number 10 here within this particular demonstration of the video. Just keep in mind that GRS 1.1 has quite a few other things in it. So this is one of the more complicated approaches. That's why I wanted to use the GRS schedule. Is most of your businesses aren't going to have this complex of a setup. That means that your process will actually be a little bit easier. If you're in the federal government or in the military, it is a lot harder to do records management, unfortunately, just because there's a lot more stuff that they're required to keep track of. But we're going to use that information. So we're going to need the item number. Now we've also got this detailed list of what applies. That would be a good information to include in here. Now, because of the way that SharePoint sets things up, you essentially, every time you create one of these, have to select the right option. So there is a lot more potential for user error with this setup. Again, lots of reasons why you would rather do Purview for this, is you set it up once and then everything just kind of works for the most part. But then we're also going to need the disposition instructions so we can see that it's temporary, and we need to destroy it at 3 years or whatever the specific guidance is. So we want to know whether it's a permanent or whether it's a temporary, so we just destroy it. That's the information that we're going to need. And then also the number of years we want to hold this, or years, months, days, depending on what the requirement happens to be. In the case of what we're going to do for both of these, it's going to be either 6 years or 3 years. So it becomes very easy to just kind of throw that number in there. But if it was 6 years, 3 months, we would just do the math on what that is and then put in, say, 6.25 or 6.24, whatever it happens to equate out to. All right, let's go back to SharePoint. So we've got our GRS authority, and in this case, we're going to do a choice option. And again, we'll put it in our records management column. And then for this, let's go ahead and delete these. And this is going to be GRS 1.1. And we'll call that financial management records. Again, you could make it say the exact same thing as what's on the GRS schedule. For this particular video, we're just going to kind of abbreviate it that way. And then we'll do GRS 2.2. And we'll just call that employee records for simplicity purposes. Now, I might be wondering, if you have a lot of different schedules, you'd have to basically type all of that information in here. Yes, that's exactly what you would have to do. Again, this is not the perfect option. I mentioned Purview is the way to go for some of this, but also keep in mind that your typical team doesn't actually have a lot of variety. So they might have 3, 5, 6 different options that they're working with inside of the schedule or the requirements that are out there for your organization. They're not necessarily going to have, like in the case of the GRS, more than 1,000 different items that they're responsible for. This would be very burdensome if you were trying to create this at the organizational level, because you could essentially have 1,000 more options if you're in the federal government trying to do just the GRS. And that's not even talking about what schedules you might have locally that apply for your organization. So this might seem kind of like a lot if you're at the program management level, but at the team level, like I said, the average team has only a handful of things that they're responsible for. It depends on how diverse that team is and how many different job functions they have on the number of things. If you've got a team that is responsible for HR stuff and IT stuff and project management stuff, they could have a very diverse requirement in terms of records management, but that is not normally how most teams are structured. Now for our demo, those are the only two, so we'll leave it like that. And again, we'll just get rid of any option. We don't want necessarily a default. We want them to pick one. And let's go ahead and hit the OK button. Let's go ahead and create another column. And for this, it'll be our GRS item. And again, this will just be a choice option here. And then we'll come back down here and we'll go ahead and put as 001. Maybe there's a 002, 003, 04, and you would want to put every possible item that that organization works with. In our case, everything's going to be 0010, but for demonstration purposes, we're going to go ahead and add a couple of different options in here. So that's all the options that we'll need. We're only going to have 010 be what we're going to use in this particular example, but we have all these other options to choose from. This is where you could have kind of a burdensome requirement to put information in here, because it's possible that you might only have a couple schedules that apply for the team, but you might have multiple items in each of those schedules. Now, fortunately, this is just a open text field, so it's very easy to put it into, say, a Word document or say in Excel, and then just kind of copy and paste it over here. So there is easier ways to update this than there might be for, say, the GRS. Now, the GRS will work the same way. If you've got an Excel that has all that information, you can just kind of copy it and paste it, and it will work for you. All right, let's go ahead and remove our options here, and we're going to go ahead and hit Enter. Now, let's go ahead and create another site column here. And for this one, we're going to call it our disposition instructions. This will be a choice again. Now, I didn't mention this, but you could actually do a calculated column. Now, again, it depends on how complicated your setup is, but for smaller teams where there aren't as many requirements, what you could do is use a calculated column and then use a formula to say, if this has been selected for the GRS authority and this item number, this is what the result should be. That works just as well. You could do that in this setup here as well. Now, in our case, I could just do that for each of the GRS schedules, but we're going to keep it very simple and just do a choice. All right, let's go ahead and scroll down, and we're going to go ahead and put our choices in here. All right, I went ahead and pasted our options in here. So one of ours has a requirement for 6 years, and then another one has a 3-year requirement. And again, we're mainly looking for temporary and any other specific guidance that's in here. Sometimes, especially in the federal government, the disposition instructions are pretty specific on what's required. So this could be a little bit longer. And again, you would want to have all of the options that are available for your document sets in here. All right, now we're looking good. Let's go ahead and hit the OK button. And let's go ahead and create another option here. Now we're going to do disposition date. And in this case, we're going to use a calculated column. And let's go ahead and scroll down. Again, this will be in our records management area. And then let's go ahead and find our columns. And in this case, we're looking for our disposition trigger date. And what we want to do is add that to 365 times our retention in period and then our retention period in years, and then we just go ahead and close this off. We want this to be a date time, and we can go ahead and hit OK. All right, let's go ahead and scroll down. I believe we have everything that we need. So we have our disposition control type, disposition date, our disposition instructions, disposition trigger date, our GRS authority, GRS item, and retention years. Now you could add additional columns if you needed to into here, but for our use case, I think that is sufficient. Let's go back up to the top here, and then we've got show all groups, or we could look at our records management column and just see that. So we do have these filters up here, which make it a little bit easier to see everything. Now let's go ahead and hit the back button here. And now we're going to go ahead and create our document sets. So come into here and go ahead and create a content type. Now for our content type, we're going to go ahead and put in GRS 1.1 financial management records. Now you'll notice that we have these options for our categories. We're going to go ahead and create a new category, and we're going to call it records management. And then we're going to choose a document set here. So document set content type and document set. Now you could put a description in here. And a lot of times what I'll put in the description is what's on the record schedule or whatever information is kind of the word picture for this. All right, I went ahead and pasted that in there. And let's go ahead and hit the create button. Now let's go ahead and add the site columns that we've already created. Now for our category, we'll just select records management and then move all of these over. And all we do is hit the save button. And as you can see, they have all been added here. Now we will come back to document set settings a little bit later after we create our document content type. We'll come back here and make some adjustments here. But for right now, that's pretty much everything that we need to do for this one. So let's go back to our content type gallery and go ahead and create the next content type. Now this one is going to be our GRS 2.2 employee management records. And then again, we'll use an existing category that we created on our last one, so records management. And this is going to be a document set, and we'll go ahead and choose document set. And then I'll go ahead and paste the description in here. All right, I've gone ahead and finalized the GRS 2.2. and I've filtered it down on the right here. You'll have the ability to either create a filter or use the pre-built-in option there for looking at your different schedules. And as we can see here, we've got both of these as document sets in here. The only other thing I did, if we take a look at this one, for example, is I did change the order of these a little bit just so that it was in more of a logical flow. You can do that by doing the reorder site columns, moving up and down as you see fit. All right, let's go back to our content type gallery. And now we're gonna go ahead and create a document content type. And we'll call this one an employee record. And then we'll go ahead and use our records management. And then for our parent category here, we're going to go ahead and choose a document content type and change our content type to a document. And let's go ahead and hit the create button here. Now for our site columns, we're going to go ahead and add some site columns in here. So let's go ahead and hit add. In this case, we're going to create a new site column. And for this one, we'll go and put document type. And again, this will be our records management column. And for this, we're going to go ahead and make it a choice option here. So we'll choose choice. And I'm going to make some up. It's not necessarily going to align with the GRS. It's basically whatever the GRS is indicating that you should have documents for is what you're going to want to put here. In our case, since we're talking about employee records, I'm just going to make up some options. For example, training certificates maybe. And again, there's a whole different record that handles training. So I understand that. Don't put that in the comments. Yes, I get it. That is not what's required for 010. And maybe we've got certifications. And then maybe we've got performance reviews. And maybe we've got derogatory content. And I think that's probably sufficient, but basically every different type of document that the user could have to put in there, you want to label it so you can identify and search for these later on. It'll also help the user know what kinds of things are supposed to go in here based on the choices that are there. All right, let's go ahead and hit save. And we've got our document type. Let's go ahead and add another one. And this one's going to be our approval status. And this assumes that there's some sort of an approval process that has to happen as part of the document upload. And for this, we'll go ahead and do a choice again. And for our choice options, we'll go with draft, submitted, verified, and final. And maybe for the default of this, we'll start with draft and hit save. All right, that looks good for this one. Let's go ahead and hit the back button here. And we're going to create another one for our financial records. And again, we'll use our records management. We'll set it for document content type and set it for document and hit create. And again, we'll go into here and create a site column. And for this, we'll go ahead and select the document type. And again, this will be our records management, and we'll make this a choice column. And for this one, we'll go ahead and put invoice, financial report. And again, these are not necessarily going to line up perfectly with what the GRS says it should be. Again, this is just for example purposes here. But basically anything that makes sense for a financial record that you want to keep. And maybe we'll do a contract modification. I don't know, those probably about right. All right, let's go ahead and hit save here. And then we'll add another one. And again, this will be for our approval status. And again, we'll use our records management column. This will be a choice. And for this one, we'll have draft, under review, approved, and final. And for this, we'll say financial record, just so it looks a little bit different when we're selecting our columns here. And we'll go ahead and set the default to draft for this one and hit save. Now let's go ahead and add from existing site columns. For this one, we're going to want to have our retention period. So let's go find our retention period. We'll add that in there. Then we want to have our disposition date and our disposition trigger date actually. And let's go ahead and save. Now we can update these to include other columns in either one of them at any point in the future as well. All right, let's go take a look at our library now. All right, let's go ahead and set up our library now. So we'll go to our library settings and we'll go to more library settings. And then let's go ahead and add our content types. And in order to do that, we do advanced settings first. Allow management of content types as yes. And we want to turn off the ability to make folders. And then let's just hit the OK button at the top, at the bottom here. And then we're ready. We can add our content types. So let's go ahead and add both of our content types in here. So this will be our first one, add that one, and 2.2, hit OK. And then we want to remove the document content type here. So let's delete this content type and hit OK. So now we can see we've got both of our options here. Let's go back to our document set demo. Now let's go ahead and create a new document set. So we can see that we've got the option for either of these. Let's go ahead and add this one. And again, we'll call this just financial records for ease. So we'll just call it financial record. And then we could put in the description from item number 10 into here. So we'll just say description of item 10. And then our authority is going to be financial management. It's going to be item number 10. Our disposition date is going to be item controlled. And our disposition instructions are going to be, I will say 3 years. And then our retention period is 3 years. And then for this one, we don't have a disposition trigger date. We can actually remove this as an option. Let's go ahead and hit save. And now we're inside of our financial record. So let's go ahead and back out of this. And we'll see that we've got our financial record here listed. Now what we could do is modify this view so that we can see the other columns. So let's go ahead and edit our view. And we're going to want some of our other options. So we'll go ahead and choose our fields that we created here. So we're looking for our GRS authority, our GS item, our retention period in years, our disposition instructions. And for this one, we don't need our disposition trigger date. We will probably add this in the next document type. I think that's most of what we need. Let's go ahead and hit OK, see what that looks like. And we can see, and we don't really need this, I don't think. We'll just go ahead and hide that one. And we'll go ahead and hide our modified by. All right, so we've got our disposition instructions. We'll go ahead and move this over here just so things kind of flow a little bit more in normal sense here. And then we've got a retention period in years. Again, we put a decimal in here for 4 digits. So that's looking pretty good. And let's go ahead and display the description also that we typed in there. So let's go to our edit view. And in this case, kind of the default is description. So you're going to end up with 2. Let's go ahead and try this one and see if this is the right one. And this is the description that we typed in there. So we can go ahead and move this over here. And that's most of what we need. Now let's go ahead and create or upload another one. And this will be our employee management records. And we'll go ahead and say this is Travis's employee records. And again, you can put the item 10 description in here, whatever that happens to be. And then let's go ahead and do 2.2. And then we've got item 10. And again, this will be container controlled. And we want this one, we'll go with 6 years. And then we'll do 6 here. And hit save. And again, we open up in here. Let's go back to our document demo set. And there we go. So we can see it has pretty much everything that we need. Now let's go ahead and modify this again. And in this case, we want to have the disposition date. So let's go ahead and add that in there and hit OK. Now let's go ahead and add one more column here. So we'll go over here, edit our view. And it'll be our disposition trigger date. Let's go ahead and hit OK. And as we can see, we didn't enter in a disposition trigger date. Let's go ahead and move this over here. And we'll go ahead and edit this one. And we can do it in grid view. Let's just say that the trigger date is, I don't know, we'll say the 7th of February. Now let's go ahead and come out of here. So we can see that it updated here. Now in the case of this, where it's the actual records, because of our calculated field and how we made it, it's not going to have an accurate number. It's just going to essentially be just a wrong number for this. So that can be adjusted in the formula to get this to be correct. Again, for this, we're not saying that the document set is determining when something's going to get deleted. That's where the calculated field needs to be slightly adjusted for that scenario. So that's easy enough to go in, and essentially if it's blank, we want to make sure that this remains blank is what we would want to make that calculated field do. All right, I went ahead and refreshed the formula. I put the formula so you can see what that is, but I went through and updated that. So now we've got no disposition date for our financial records. Again, that's going to be controlled from the actual specific documents, and each document will have its own disposition date. Let's go ahead and click into our financial record here. And what we can see is that we've got all the same type of columns in here. And let's go ahead and create a document. So we'll go create or upload. And we have our financial record document type that we created. So let's go ahead and add that in here. And it's going to create a document. We could also just drop files in here, but let's go ahead and we'll just throw some random stuff in here. And we'll call this the annual report. And I don't think we had that as a type, but we're just going to call it that for purposes of this. And let's go ahead and close out of this and come back over here. And now we can see that we've got our document, and you can see it inherited all of the information from this document set. So the way that we set it on the outside pulls down into here. But maybe we don't want to see all of this. Remember, we had a bunch of columns that we created for these things. We want to see that information. So how do we do that? Well, first let's go over here, and we're going to save our view as. And we're going to call this our financial document view. And we'll go ahead and hit save. All right, so that is our financial document view. Now we need to adjust what we want to see and not see here. So let's go ahead and go here, and we're going to edit this view. Now we don't necessarily need to see all of this information here. Maybe it's helpful to see the disposition instruction, but I don't think so. I think we can just make do with our retention period. And in this case, we do want the disposition trigger date and our disposition date to show up in here. Now we also want to have our document type. Now I did go through and change this. Now remember, I think I had document type as document type for each of these when I created it. You are going to want to differentiate the same name. So in this case, document type is the correct column, but we'd actually have this 2 times, just like we had with our description, where description was shown twice in here. You'd have the same thing for statuses, document types. So you do actually want to differentiate the titles just a little bit so you can identify which one you're looking for. Otherwise, you have to do the trial and error to figure out which one. Usually the first one listed is the first one created. So you can usually safely bet that if you're looking for the second that one was created, that you're looking for that. But just to make it easier, just set it up this way so that you've got a little bit different on the name. And then we can come down here and we're going to look for our status, and that'll be our approval status financial record. And let's go ahead and hit OK. And we'll see how that looks. Now it took us back to our document set demo here. So let's go ahead and click on our financial record. And we want to look at our financial document view and see how this is looking. So we have our retention period. Now, in this case, we do actually require a disposition trigger date. So let's go ahead and edit this. So we'll edit in grid view, and let's go ahead and add a date, and we'll just put it as, I don't know, next week. That's probably good. And we can see that that has been updated now. And let's go ahead and update our document type. And that will be a financial report. And our status was default of draft. So that works out well. And let's just kind of reorganize this a little bit. Let's go put this over here. So we got our retention period, we've got our trigger date. Now what we can do is we can add some color coding. So if we click here, we can go to column settings, format this column. And we want to do some conditional formatting. And let's go ahead and edit the rule. And it'll be our disposition date. If it is before today, then we want to change the color and we'll make it red and go ahead and hit save. And then we can close this off. Let's go ahead and adjust this. So this is in 2029. So we're going to have to back up our year a little bit. So we'll go to 2022. That's plenty of time. And we'll hit the 1st. And there we can go. Now we can have a visual indicator whenever we come in here of whether we have things that are coming due. We could also create automations to identify this information and send an email. If you do that approach, and I'm not going to cover that as part of this video, if that's something you're interested in, let me know in the comments, and then I'll go ahead and create a automation for this. I always recommend sending automations to groups because people change, the groups typically don't. So whenever somebody leaves or comes in, you typically add them to an email distribution group. If you send it to a specific person, there's a high probability that that person might leave the organization, and then there'd be no action being taken unless they come in here to actually look for everything that is ready for disposition. So now that we've created this view, we want this to be the view that is used coming into here. So what we're going to do is go up to our library settings and go to more library settings. And then we're going to take a look at our financial management records. And we want to do our document set settings. And then scroll down here. So the welcome page we want to have happen is going to be our financial document view. So let's go ahead and hit OK. And then we'll go back to our library. Now, as we can see, everything is in here. We will want to adjust our formula because blanks is obviously before today. Now, to adjust this, we just click up here, column settings, format this column. And we're going to want to adjust our rule a little bit. Let's move this over so we can check that this works. And we'll edit the rule. And what we're going to do is add a condition. And I'm going to say disposition date is after. And all we need to do is pick any random date. So we'll pick a specific date. And we want to make sure it's going to be before whenever we put records in here. So we'll back up a couple of years. It's unfortunately, we can't just type in the box because that would make it a lot easier. But we'll just go back to 1997 just for safety and hit save. And as we can see, it is no longer red. And if we go ahead and click into this, let's go ahead and close this off and test this. So we should see a record that is red here if this is working correctly. And we do. And everything is working as expected. Now let's go back to our document sets. Now I went through and added a view for this. So if we click into here, we'll see that the view is our employee record view. So we've all set that as default. And in this one, it's based on the document set. So it doesn't really matter about the disposition information. This is really the only columns that matter. So you can fine tune which columns for each document set that you want to see, which is one of the real strong benefits of using document sets in general, is the ability to do that, or to just have your document set fields as well. So you can kind of fine tune every aspect of this based on what you're trying to do. Now that's pretty much it for today's video. Hopefully you found the content helpful. Now don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button if you like this kind of content. It really does help the channel grow. Also, some of you might have found you have the ability to click the hype button on videos. It doesn't apply for everybody and for all content creators that are out there, but it's specifically designed to help YouTube channels grow when they're smaller like mine. So if you do see the option to hit that hype button underneath this video, that also really helps the channel grow. Let me know in the comments. Do you do a lot of document set in your organization, or is this the first time you're seeing this kind of information? And also, if you want to see how to automate an email, let me know that too, and I can kind of show you what that process looks like as well. If you're the person in charge of this, it is kind of nice to get an email whenever you have records that are coming up for disposition. That's all for now. Until next time.